Dust Creek was the kind of town that let the wind do most of the talking. Dry, sun-bleached, and beaten to near silence by years of dust storms and desperate men, it sat wedged between two jagged ridges, like a secret best forgotten. On this sweltering afternoon, the only place with shade and breath was the courthouse, though no one dared call it cool. Inside, the heat pressed like judgment itself. Judge Alden sat rigid behind the bench, a man carved from oak and bitter coffee. His silver spectacles rested low on his nose, eyes above them narrowed to flint slits. In front of him stood Clara Larkin, widow of the late Thomas Larkin, once the most respected cattleman this side of the Pecos. She wore her Sunday blue, the collar buttoned high, her hands folded in front of her like someone at prayer. Not a flicker of fear crossed her face, only something deeper, a quiet resolve, a flame banked and hidden behind the eyes. Sheriff Denton, thick-necked and swollen with self-importance, stood to her right. His mustache twitched like a broom in a dustpan every time he spoke. "Judge, the evidence is plain as prairie sky," he said, voice like dry gravel. "We caught her hauling food and bandages out toward Snakejaw Pass, right after the Blacksburg gang hit Clifton's bank. She knew where they were holed up. Ain't no question." Clara said nothing. "You say she knew where they were holed up," Judge Alden replied slowly. "Yet you didn't follow her trail. Didn't reddened. We were delayed. By the time we got there, they'd cleared out." "A mighty convenient delay," someone muttered from the back benches. The judge banged his gavel once. "No more interruptions." The courthouse pews were packed. Men leaned forward with bristled chins resting on calloused fists. Women clutched handkerchiefs, whispering behind fans. Children, too young to understand guilt or innocence, sat squirming in their mothers' laps, restless beneath the tension. Clara finally raised her chin. Her voice, when it came, was low but clear. "I brought food and bandages because I thought a man was dying. I didn't know he was a black spur until after." "Who was the man?" the judge asked. She hesitated. Then, with every eye upon her, she said, "He never gave his name." Denton snorted. "You expect us to believe that?" "I expect nothing from you, Sheriff," she replied, her gaze as cold as river ice. A murmur swept the room. Even Judge Alden blinked once, surprised at the fire in her tone. Clara had been Dust Creek's paragon of quiet decency for years. She buried her husband with dignity, kept her ranch running alone, refused every offer of marriage or sale. When bandits and hardship came, she met them both with the same unwavering calm. But now the court saw something new, not just pride but defiance. "Mrs. Larkin," the judge said, lacing his fingers together, "you understand the charges against you? Aiding and abetting a known gang of murderers." "I do." "And do you understand what the sentence would be if convicted?" "I do." He studied her a moment. "Then let me ask plainly, are you guilty?" "No, sir." Outside, the wind stirred the dust like spirits dancing. Inside, stillness reigned. A baby whimpered somewhere near the back, quickly hushed. The judge leaned back in his chair, sighing. "You've always had the town's respect, Clara. That counts for something. But so does evidence. I can't ignore the fact you were seen heading into outlaw territory with supplies hours after the robbery." "I did what I thought was right," she said, "and I'd do it again." Denton scoffed, but he didn't speak. The judge reached for his gavel again. "Then, unless new testimony presents itself, I see no choice." The door slammed open with a sound like gunfire. Every head whipped around. The double doors banged against the walls, sunlight pouring in like a flood. And there, silhouetted by the afternoon blaze, stood a man on the threshold, dust-caked, tall, had low over his eyes, spurs still jingling from the gallop. "She's my wife, Judge," he roared, voice cracking through the room like thunder. "You got no right to judge her without hearing what I've got to say." Gasps echoed. Clara staggered back a step, her hand flying to her chest. Her mouth parted, but no words came. The stranger stepped forward, boots echoing on the pine floor. He walked with a limp, the kind born of bullets and bad roads. Yet there was something sure in the way he carried himself, like a man used to standing on gallows and stepping down alive. Judge Alden rose slowly, disbelief plain on his face. "And just who in hell are you?" The man pushed back his hat. His face was lean, weathered, streaked with grit and blood. A scar curled along his jaw, but his eyes, green, sharp, were unmistakable to those who'd seen them once. Clara took a breath like she'd forgotten how. "Ezra Boone," he said, "and I've been dead 5 years. But I sure as hell didn't die so you could hang my wife." The silence was complete. Even the wind outside had stopped. All that remained in the air was dust, heat, and the sudden, seismic shifting of truth. And Clara, still staring, whispered the name like a prayer returned to life. Ezra. The name Ezra Boone hung in the room, like smoke from a just-fired gun. People gaped. Sheriff Denton's mouth opened and closed twice before he found any words. "Ezra Boone's dead," he said, half to himself, half to the room. "Died out near Elkhorn Gulch in a canyon shootout. I seen the grave myself." "You seen a mound of rocks with a name scratched in wood," Ezra replied, stepping closer, eyes never leaving Clara. "You didn't look close enough to see the tracks leading away." Judge Alden lowered himself slowly into his chair, as though afraid the wood might betray him. "Explain yourself, son. Start with why you've been letting the world think you were buried." Ezra took off his hat and turned to the crowd. The weariness in his frame was evident now, the way it clung to his shoulders, like a coat too long worn. But his voice, when it came again, was clear as a church bell. "5 years back, I rode with Marshal Kane's unit, working undercover to break the Blackspur gang. I was young, full of fire, thought I could outsmart outlaws by learning how they breathe." He looked at the judge. "To do that, I had to become one of them, or near enough to fool the rest. New name, new scars, new sins." He turned to Clara, softer now. "When I met Clara, I was using the name Caleb Dorsey. Hired myself out to her ranch under that alias. But what started as a lie turned into truth." Clara's voice barely carried. "You told me your past was behind you. I wanted it to be. I meant every word I ever said to you. That wedding, small as it was real. But I couldn't leave the job unfinished. The gang was closing in on something big, and I knew if I left them then, everything we'd built would fall. So I rode back out, and I didn't come back." He glanced at the room now, to Sheriff Denton and the murmuring townsfolk. "When the Blackspur raided Elkhorn, I tipped the marshals. The plan was for me to go down with them, disappear in the fight. My death was the cover. But the gang had moles even in the marshal's office. Things went bad fast. Men died on both sides. I barely crawled out with my life. Thought if I showed my face again, Clara'd be hunted too. So I stayed gone." Denton crossed his arms. "Convenient story, Boone. But why show up now?" Ezra's jaw clenched. "Because the gang is planning something bigger. They're regrouping near the southern ridges, led by a man they call Bishop now. But I knew him as Jed Holland. Clara didn't help them. They used her. They knew who she was to me. They threatened her life, to get what they wanted. And when she brought that food, she wasn't helping outlaws. She was trying to save me." Clara's hands trembled where they clutched the front of her dress. "It was you. That night in the canyon." Ezra nodded, took a bullet to the leg, and played dead. "They left me under a rock shelf. Figured I was finished. You saved me, Clara. Didn't even know it." Judge Alden tapped his gavel against the bench, not a bang, just a rhythm, as if helping his mind keep pace. "Let me get this straight. You're telling this court you were a federal agent, operating undercover, and faked your own death to keep your wife safe?" "Yes, sir. And you're prepared to testify under oath?" "Right here, right now." A voice from the gallery, Mrs. Sanderson, the baker's wife, called out. "If that's true, why'd you leave her with nothing? She nearly lost the ranch." Ezra turned to the crowd, guilt etched into every line of his face. "I wanted to write, but I didn't know who was watching. Didn't know if they'd trace it back to her. I thought I was doing right by her by vanishing for good." Clara looked away, and something in Ezra seemed to cave at the sight. "I know what it cost you," he said softly, "and I'll carry that weight. But if I let her hang now, then all the lies I told, all the pain I caused, it was for nothing." Judge Alden leaned forward, resting both elbows on the desk. Sheriff Denton, did you verify any of Mr. Boone's claims when you heard this name before? Denton swallowed, clearly flustered. We all thought he was dead. He was buried. Hell, I helped stack the stones. But you didn't check the body? It was burned. Could have been anyone. The judge sat back, scowling. A younger man at the back, Deputy Ward, spoke up. If Boone's telling the truth, the Black Spur gang ain't scattered like we thought. They're not, Ezra said. They've been getting supplies through a pipeline right here in Dust Creek. That's why I rode hard to get here today. Clara's arrest was the tip of something bigger. They wanted her out of the way. But now that I've shown my face, they'll come harder. Judge Alden was silent a long while, steepling his fingers, eyes darting between Clara and Ezra. Finally, he turned to the gallery. This court is not in the habit of trying ghosts. And I'm no fool. I know truth can wear a dozen masks in this town. But I believe a man willing to ride straight into his own funeral deserves a hearing. He stood. Mrs. Larkin's sentencing is postponed until further testimony can be gathered. Mr. Boone, you'll present your full account tomorrow morning, under oath. Sheriff Denton, see to it the courthouse is guarded tonight. If there's a gang tailing this man, they may already be among us. Murmurs rippled again through the room, but Judge Alden silenced them with one final bang of the gavel. We reconvene at dawn. As the courthouse began to empty, Clara remained where she stood, eyes on Ezra. Her voice, when it came, was thick with emotion. Why didn't you come back sooner? He walked to her slowly, dust clinging to every step. Because I wasn't sure I could protect you, and now I'm not sure I ever could. She didn't reach for him, but she didn't turn away either. Outside, the wind had risen again, and with it came the howl of something wild in the desert, something unfinished, circling ever closer. The night in Dust Creek fell hard and fast, like a curtain drawn over a stage where no one remembered their lines. The courthouse sat under the pale glow of a high desert moon, its windows lit from within. Guards posted by Sheriff Denton paced outside, rifles in hand, but they looked more like men trying to convince themselves they still held control of the town. Inside, Judge Alden sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled, listening to the scrape of Ezra Boone's voice as he spun the tale of his double life. The courtroom had been emptied of the general public. Only the judge, Denton, Deputy Ward, and Clara remained. A lamp flickered near the bench. Ezra stood in the pool of its glow, his shadow thrown long and thin across the floor. I joined the marshals when I was 20, Ezra began, voice calm but worn. Learned early that justice don't ride in on a white horse. Sometimes it slips in the back door dressed in a sinner's coat. The Black Spur was different. Ruthless. Organized. Not just thugs with pistols. They had money behind them. Strategy. Purpose. He paused, glancing toward Clara. We figured someone with land and influence was feeding them routes, supplies, maybe even protection. I was assigned to go in deep. Took the name Caleb Dorsey. Passed myself off as a drifter with nothing to lose. Gained their trust slow. One job at a time. Denton snorted. And all that time, you expect us to believe you didn't cross a line? I crossed plenty, Ezra admitted, but never one I couldn't return from. I never killed for them. I never stole for profit. I played a part, and I waited. Judge Alden tapped his pen against the desk. And when did Clara become involved? Ezra looked at her again, and this time his eyes softened. That first spring on her ranch. She was hiring hands. Most folks thought she was bound to sell. Too much land, no sons, no allies. But she ran that place with grit. She saw something in me, even through the lies. I tried to keep my distance. Didn't want to pull her into what I was carrying. But it was like trying to hold back the tide with a fence post. We married quiet, under a cottonwood down by the creek. Just us and the preacher. Clara spoke, her voice low and steady. He left 2 weeks later. Told me he had to settle a debt. I didn't know it was the gang. I didn't know it'd be 5 years before I saw his face again. Ezra lowered his head. When the gang hit Clifton's bank, that wasn't just another job. That was a message. They wanted everyone to know they were back. I was supposed to warn the marshals, arranged it with a signal fire. But the plan fell apart. Ambush. Shots in the dark. I went down with a leg full of lead and a busted name. They left me to die under a canyon shelf. Would've, too, if Clara hadn't come. Denton leaned forward. And how exactly did she find you? Ezra smiled bitterly. That's the part that still haunts me. I think they wanted her to find me. Someone in town tipped them she'd ride if she thought I was in danger. She brought a pack of food and cloth. Saved my life without knowing whose it was. I saw his face just before I left, Clara added quietly. He was half dead, but I saw those eyes. I didn't say a word to anyone after. Thought it must have been my mind playing tricks. A ghost. Judge Alden leaned back. You say someone tipped them off. Someone from Dust Creek. Ezra nodded. There's a leak here. A man feeding the gang what they need. Routes, names, supplies. That's why they framed Clara. They wanted her silenced. Denton looked around sharply. Who? Ezra's voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know yet, but I'm close. The room fell into silence, heavy with the weight of suspicion. Deputy Ward cleared his throat. There's someone who might help, he said slowly. Young boy. Orphan. Name's Eli Carter. Lives behind the stables. Keeps his head down, but he sees everything. Why him? Clara asked. Ward shifted uncomfortably. 2 nights ago, he tried to tell me something. I brushed him off. Said he saw men sneaking around the old mill. I figured he was just making noise for a meal. Ezra's eyes narrowed. Where is he now? Out back of McHale's barn, last I saw. Sleeping in the hay. Ezra turned to the judge. Let me speak with him. Tonight. You'll speak with him in the morning, Judge Alden said firmly. For now, you're under my protection and under watch. Sheriff, post 2 more men at the doors. We don't know who's listening. But the judge's words were too slow. A window shattered, glass exploded inward, and the courthouse lights blinked out in a sudden gust of wind. Someone screamed. Gunfire cracked through the dark. Down. Denton bellowed. Clara hit the floor. Ezra lunged toward her, covering her body with his. A bullet thudded into the wall inches above them. Silhouettes moved outside, 3, maybe 4 figures. Muzzle flashes lit the windows like lightning. Ward fired back through the open doorway. The smell of gunpowder filled the room. Ezra rolled to the judge's desk, yanked open a drawer, and grabbed the revolver resting inside. This ain't no courtroom no more, he muttered, cocking the hammer. Clara, from the floor, reached for a fallen rifle beside a guard's lifeless body. She moved with precision, loading and firing once into the night. One of the shadows outside dropped. Judge Alden, stunned, stared. You've handled a rifle before. I was born on a farm with 3 brothers, Clara said flatly, reloading. You think I embroider my way through drought and wolves? The gunmen scattered into the night as Ward and Denton fired the last rounds. Silence returned, but it wasn't relief. It was retreat. Ezra looked at the judge, breathing heavy. They're not here to threaten anymore. They're here to finish the job. And in the thick, acrid smoke of the courthouse, Clara's voice came clear and sharp. Then it's time we found out who opened the gate. Morning in Dust Creek came slow, dragging its feet, like an old man afraid of what waited outside. The sun climbed over the mesa, casting long shadows through alleys still stained with the night's gunpowder. The courthouse, once proud and stoic, now bore scars. Broken windows, chipped brick, the sharp smell of lead and ash lingering in its frame. Ezra Boone stood near the doors, eyes scanning every rooftop, every awning. He hadn't slept. His shirt, torn and dust-caked, hung loose over his revolver. Clara stood beside him, rifle slung across her back like it had always belonged there. She didn't speak much, but her silence was louder than fear. It was forged in something colder, sharper. Sheriff Denton arrived first, his hat pulled low, jaw set. 2 men dead, 1 wounded. All ours, he said. The shooters vanished like ghosts. No one saw where they went. No prints. No sign. Ezra nodded. They knew the streets. Moved like they'd mapped them in blood. They have. And they had help. Clara's eyes flicked up. Still think it's just a few shadows in the night. Denton didn't answer, but the grim knot tightening in his jaw said plenty. Behind them, Deputy Ward jogged up, hair damp, boots muddy. "I found Eli," he panted. "Tried to sneak out of town before dawn. Said someone threatened him. Promised to cut his tongue out if he talked." Ezra turned sharply. "Where is he?" "In the back cell. Safe. For now." Ezra stalked past, Clara on his heels. Down the hallway, past blood-streaked floorboards and overturned benches. The jail sat tucked behind the courthouse. The boy inside the cell looked barely 15, thin as a fence post, eyes wide with a kind of fear that lived deep and permanent. Ezra knelt by the bars. "Eli," he said gently, "ain't here to hurt you, but we need the truth." The boy hesitated. His voice, when it came, was cracked and dry. "It's the blacksmith." Clara frowned. "Malder." The boy nodded quickly. "He talks to men who don't wear Dust Creek dust on their boots. Slips them sacks late at night. I saw him out by the canyon pass. Brought dynamite last week. Said it was for repairs. But he don't fix nothing. Just hammers and watches." Ezra stood. "Mulder's been feeding them. He's their eyes in town." Denton shook his head. "He's been here for 20 years. "Exactly," Clara said. "He knows everyone. We trust him. So no one watches when he leaves a barn unlocked or slips a gang sign to a stranger." Denton cursed under his breath. "I'll get men to his shop." "No," Ezra interrupted. "Not yet. If he's their link, he's our way in. If we rush him, we lose the trail." The sheriff stared. "Then what do you suggest?" Ezra's voice dropped. "We let word slip that I'm leaving town, that I've given up the fight, and when the gang hears it, Mulder'll send a message. We follow that message. We follow it all the way to Bishop." Clara raised an eyebrow. "And what if Mulder smells the trap?" "Then we spring it early." Later that afternoon, Ezra stood in front of McHale's saloon, letting the lie soak into the town's whispering winds. "Ezra Boone's done," folks murmured. "He's riding west. Leave the dead to bury the dead." Inside Mulder's shop, the blacksmith pounded iron with more force than needed. His eyes flicked toward the window too often. Just before dusk, a boy, no one from town, came to the door. They didn't speak. Mulder simply handed over a folded scrap of paper and turned back to his forge. Ezra watched from the alley, silent as dusk. "There it is," he whispered. By the time the sun dipped behind a ridge, they were riding. Ezra, Clara, Denton, and Ward, 4 shadows across the canyon trail. They stayed low, lanterns hooded, moving like wolves on the scent of blood. The message led east, to a forgotten gully choked with rock and shadow. Smoke curled faint from behind the ridge. The scent of coffee, firewood, and gun oil hung in the air. Ezra crouched at the ridge's edge, peering through a break in the brush. Below, a camp of 12 men, horses tied near boulders, tents scattered like broken teeth. And at the center, a tall man in a gray coat, silver hair pulled back, rifle slung across a shoulder. His voice echoed up faintly. "Boone's alive, and he'll come. All we have to do is wait." Ezra's breath caught. "Jed Holland," he muttered. Clara whispered, "Bishop." "Same devil. New sermon." Denton shifted beside them. "We can't take 12 armed men with 4 of us." "We won't," Ezra said. "Not yet, but we let him know we see them." He stood, full silhouette against the dying light, and whistled once, sharp, cutting. The camp below exploded into action, men scrambling, rifles raised, shouting into the wind. Ezra fired one shot into the dirt just outside their ring, then disappeared back down the slope, Clara and the others following fast. They didn't speak again until they reached the canyon mouth. Clara rode beside him, face tight with thought. What was that for? "To remind them this war's not over," Ezra said. "To rattle Bishop. He likes control. Hates ghosts." Ward looked over his shoulder. "So what now?" Ezra's eyes were cold and sharp. "Now we drag the snake into the open, and we cut off the head." But even as the moonlight spilled over the ridge behind them, Clara's mind wasn't on Bishop or ambushes or gunsmoke. She was thinking about the man beside her, the man she'd buried once in her heart, now resurrected with old scars and new secrets. And she was wondering, not for the first time, if justice was really what they were chasing, or if it was vengeance wearing a mask. They came at dawn. The Black Spur gang rode out of the canyon like wolves tasting blood, led by Jed Holland in his long gray coat, rifle in hand, eyes hungry for an ending. Dust Creek had no army, no barricades, only a sheriff with thinning patience, a deputy with a trembling hand, a blacksmith's forge now locked and abandoned, and a widow standing in the street with a rifle propped against her hip like it had never left. Ezra Boone stood by the steps of the courthouse, hat low, pistol holstered but ready. The town behind him held its breath. Children were hidden in root cellars. Storefronts shuttered, and still the air buzzed with heat and something sharper. Regret. I count 9. Denton murmured from beside the jailhouse. Plus Holland. Ezra nodded. Malder. Gone. Slipped out after dark. Took everything but his name. Ezra didn't flinch. He'll answer another day. Across the street, Clara loaded her rifle with clean, deliberate motions. No ceremony, no prayer. Just steel, powder, and purpose. Holland slowed his horse, just past the trough. Boone, he called, voice carrying smooth as whiskey. You could have died quiet. Now you'll die loud. Ezra stepped forward, hands out. You made a mistake, Jed. You should have stayed a ghost. Holland grinned. Ghosts don't bleed. You, on the other hand. He lifted his rifle, but Ezra moved first. His pistol barked once, striking the weapon from Holland's hands. It clattered against the dirt. Chaos erupted. Gunfire burst from rooftops. Ward and 2 volunteers opened fire from above the saloon. The gang scattered, some diving for cover, others returning shots blind. One went down before his boots hit the ground. Another took a bullet to the shoulder and screamed. Clara didn't wait. She charged into the open, firing twice. One man toppled from his saddle. Another's hat flew clean off his head as he scrambled behind a barrel. Holland ducked low, dragging a revolver from his boot. He fired wild toward Ezra, missing by inches. Ezra advanced slowly, steadily, each shot measured, as though counting sins. He moved like a man who'd walked into hell before and didn't mind the heat. Denton kept low, directing townsfolk to cover, returning fire only when certain. Dust Creek wasn't a fortress, but it had something better now, reason to stand. The fight was short, brutal, and echoing. When the smoke cleared, 3 gang men lay dead in the dirt. 2 were bleeding out by the feed store, groaning in pain. The others dropped their weapons one by one, hands raised, eyes wide. Whatever loyalty they had to Holland had died with the last bullet fired over their heads. But Holland wasn't done. He rushed Clara from behind, knife drawn, mouth twisted in something between a snarl and a prayer. She turned just in time, blocking the first swipe with her rifle stock. They grappled, close and ugly. She shoved back, tried to raise her weapon again, but he was too fast. Then Ezra was there. He didn't yell, didn't warn. He tackled Holland to the ground, wrestled the knife from his hand, and delivered a single punch that ended the fight before it began. Holland slumped, unconscious, a trail of blood curling from his lip. Silence returned, the kind that doesn't feel like peace, but something heavier. A silence that asks, what now? Ezra stood slowly. Clara stared at him, breathing hard, hair plastered to her forehead, dust streaking her cheeks. You always show up late, she said, voice raw. He smiled faintly, but just in time. Denton and Ward gathered the surviving gang members. The townsfolk emerged cautiously. Eli peeked from the livery, a slingshot still clutched in his fist. Judge Alden appeared last, stepping out of the courthouse, robe still dusty, eyes wide at the wreckage. This town, he said, owes you both. Ezra shook his head. No, it owed Clara. Now it's even. The judge looked to her. Will you stay? Clara looked at Ezra, and for a long second, the world narrowed to just them. The unspoken years, the unanswered questions, the dust of betrayal that still clung to both of them. I'll rebuild the ranch, she said finally. There's still land worth fighting for, and people worth teaching to fight. Ezra nodded. And me. She didn't answer right away. Then, you ride with me. but not as Caleb, or the man you had to be. And if the past catches up? She leveled her gaze. Then we face it together. The townsfolk slowly began clearing the street, helping the wounded, pulling tarps over the dead. The sun rose higher, shining down not on a battlefield but a beginning. Ezra Boone holstered his pistol for the last time that morning, and as he walked beside Clara toward the edge of town, toward the waiting trail, Dust Creek whispered a new story, of a widow who wouldn't bow, of a man who rose from shadow, of how legends are sometimes born not from glory, but from the choice to stand when silence would be easier. And somewhere beyond the horizon, justice rode on,